June 4, 1942. Eastern Island, Midway Atoll. 7:10 a.m. Albert Ernest climbed into his Grumman TBF Avenger knowing the odds. 25 years old. Richmond, Virginia. 6 missions under his belt, not one successful torpedo drop. The Japanese fleet sat 180 miles northwest, 4 carriers, battleships, the whole striking arm of their navy. Ernest's job? Fly straight at them with a weapon that failed 7 times out of 10. Behind him, Harry Fryer checked his .50 caliber. 17. Fresh from Springfield, Massachusetts, still had his high school graduation photos in his footlocker. In the belly gun position, Jay Manning from Seattle, 19 years old. The 3 of them had flown together for exactly 72 hours. The TBF Avenger looked impressive on paper. Twin-row radial, 2,000 horses, could hit 300 miles per hour up high. Internal bomb bay carried a 2,000-pound Mark 13 torpedo. Newest, most advanced torpedo bomber America had. Problem was, the torpedo was garbage. You had to drop it below 130 feet, flying under 130 miles per hour. Faster or higher. The thing shattered when it hit water. Even perfect drops went wrong constantly. 36% never armed. 20% sank immediately. 20% went sideways. 18% ran at wrong depth. Only 31% worked as designed. The Navy knew. Bureau of Ordnance had files full of failure reports. Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, every engagement showed the same pattern. Torpedoes that wouldn't run, wouldn't arm, wouldn't explode. Pilots dying to deliver duds. Everyone knew who to blame. Naval Torpedo Station, Newport, Rhode Island. They controlled everything: production, design, testing. One factory, one design bureau, one facility for the entire U.S. Navy. No competition, no alternatives, no reason to improve. Rhode Island congressmen protected Newport's monopoly like a family heirloom. Try to build torpedoes elsewhere? Dead in committee. Criticism of performance? Buried in classified files. Newport workers kept peacetime hours. 40-hour weeks, no overtime. They produced 100 Mark 13s monthly when the Navy needed 500. Nobody pushed them. Nobody could. Ernest took off with 5 other Avengers, Lieutenant Langdon Fieberling leading. Within 60 minutes, 5 of 6 would be smoking wreckage in the Pacific. Not one torpedo would explode. Fieberling, dead. Charles Brune, dead. Oswald Gay, dead. Victor Lewis, dead. Darrell Woodside, dead. All their gunners, dead. 15 men total, delivering weapons that wouldn't work even if they reached target. Only Ernest survived. Landed his shot-up bird with 64 bullet holes, 9 20mm cannon strikes, Manning dead in the turret, Fryer bleeding. His torpedo fell out somewhere over ocean, release mechanism wrecked by Japanese fire. He never knew if it would have worked anyway. The problem wasn't the pilots, wasn't tactics, wasn't even the aircraft. The problem was water. More specifically, what happened when torpedo met water. The Mark 13, 22.4 inches diameter, 13 feet 5 inches long, 2,216 pounds. Blunt nose packed with 600 pounds of Torpex, 50% more punch than TNT. Should have been enough to crack any ship open. But first it had to hit. Before hitting, it had to run. Before running, it had to survive water entry. Water doesn't compress. Hit it fast enough, might as well be concrete. The Mark 13's guts were designed in 1925 when aircraft crawled at 80 miles per hour and dropped from 50 feet. By 1942, torpedo bombers screamed at 300, but the torpedo was still living in the past. Its gyroscope, which kept it tracking straight, would shatter under more than 10 G's deceleration. Water impact at 150 miles per hour created 15 G's. The depth control, just a hydrostatic valve and pendulum setup, jammed if the torpedo entered steeper than 30 degrees. Propeller shaft bent if it hit anything but perfectly flat. Bureau of Ordnance knew all this. They'd tested extensively at Newport. Their solution? Restrict drop parameters so severely that torpedo bombers became clay pigeons. Fly straight, level, 130 miles per hour, 100 feet altitude, directly at enemy ship. Hold that course 10 seconds before drop to stabilize the gyro. Release exactly 800 yards out. Any deviation meant failure. Following those parameters meant flying through concentrated flak for 30 seconds minimum. Suicide mission specifications. The Mark 13's problems were documented July 1941, Torpedo Squadron 6 training exercise. 10 torpedoes, perfect conditions. 5 went haywire immediately. 4 sank. 1 ran somewhat normally. This was 11 months before Midway, 5 before Pearl Harbor. Navy testing at Patuxent River showed dropping over 150 knots collapsed the rear fins. Water impact crushed steering mechanisms. Torpedo would sink, circle, or porpoise. Sometimes the warhead just fell off. Coral Sea, May 1942. Analysis of recovered Mark 13s revealed critical issues. 3 failed to detonate after perfect drops, all examined. Intact warheads, properly armed. Problem was the Mark 6 exploder mechanism. Firing pin too fragile. Hit ship's hull at any angle but perpendicular. Pin bent or broke before triggering detonator. Engineers calculated the Mark 6 would fail to detonate roughly 40% of the time, even on direct hits. Reports documenting these failures hit Bureau of Ordnance desks May 20, 1942. Classified secret, filed away. No action. No modifications approved. Pilots kept dying with defective weapons. August 1942. American torpedo bomber losses were catastrophic. Midway, 15 TBD devastators from Hornet shot down. 0 hits. 6 Avengers from Midway Island attacked. 5 destroyed. No hits. Eastern Solomons, 7 Avengers lost. They sank 1 light carrier, but only because multiple torpedoes were dropped and Japanese damage control failed. Most hits didn't explode. Battle of Santa Cruz, October 1942. Worse still. Lieutenant Commander John Collett led Torpedo Squadron 10 from Enterprise against Japanese carriers. His squadron dropped 12 torpedoes at Carrier Zuikaku from perfect position. Textbook approaches, regulation height, and speed. 2 hit. Neither exploded. Collett's Avenger got nailed by Zeros immediately after. His gunner Aviation Radioman 2nd Class William Woods transmitted one final message. Torpedoes hit, but no explosion. Tell them the torpedoes don't work. Woods was 19. His body was never found. Ensign George Morgan, same squadron, survived Santa Cruz. His diary entry that night. Might as well drop telephone poles for all the good these torpedoes do. Tommy Morrison got perfect drop on cruiser today. Saw it hit right amidships. Nothing. Torpedo just bounced off, sank. Tommy got shot down 30 seconds later. Last words on radio were cursing Bureau of Ordnance. Lieutenant Bruce Harwood, Torpedo Squadron 6, wrote his wife November 1942. Heavily censored, but still clear. We're being asked to do impossible with equipment that's censored. Lost 6 best friends last month. All flying perfect attacks that's censored. If this war's lost, won't be because of pilots or planes. Will be because censored won't admit censored and fix censored. Censors removed all torpedo failure references. Harwood's widow understood what he meant when she received his effects after he was killed at Guadalcanal, January 1943. The pilots knew. Every torpedo squadron in Pacific knew their weapons were junk. Talked about it in ready rooms. Wrote about it in letters home that censors redacted. But they kept flying because that was the job. Some started looking for their own solutions. California Institute of Technology entered the torpedo problem late 1942. Not Navy request, the National Defense Research Committee. Civilian scientists trying to mobilize American technology for war. Navy hadn't asked for help. Bureau of Ordnance insisted Mark 13 was satisfactory. Just pilots dropping them wrong. Dr. Charles Lauritsen didn't buy it. Lauritsen was Caltech physicist, had been working rockets when asked to examine torpedo problem. Knew nothing about torpedoes. Knew plenty about physics, hydrodynamics, what happened when objects hit water fast. January 1943, Lauritsen's team established testing facility at Morris Dam, northeast of Los Angeles. Built a 300-foot slide-down dam face. Bottom was Morris Reservoir, mountain lake with water clarity perfect for high-speed underwater photography. They started dropping torpedoes. Not live ones, weighted dummies same size and weight as Mark 13s. Filmed everything. High-speed cameras on slide, underwater cameras in reservoir, cameras on boats tracking torpedo paths. First discovery. Navy's drop doctrine was completely backwards. Manual set approach target steady altitude and speed, release torpedo specific distance, maintain course until torpedo hit water. Lauritsen's films showed this created worst possible water entry. Torpedo oscillated during fall, swinging nose up and down like pendulum. Hit water at random angles, flat, nose first, tail first. Each angle produced different failures. Flat impacts, torpedo body flexed. 2,000-pound weapon compressed like accordion, crushing internal components. Gyroscope shattered. Depth control jammed. Propeller shaft bent. Even if it started running, veered off course, or porpoised. Nose first impacts. Drove torpedo too deep. Mark 13 designed for 10-foot depth. Nose first entry could send it down 50 feet before depth control reacted. By then, might be below target's keel, or pressure change damaged warhead detonator. Tail first impacts. Worst. Propeller and rudders hit first, bending or breaking off completely. No directional control, no propulsion. Just sank. Lauritsen calculated at standard drop speeds. Only 15-degree window of acceptable entry angles. Chance of torpedo naturally falling within that window? Less than 20%. Everything Navy believed about torpedo drops was wrong. Doctrine said drop low and slow to minimize water impact. Films showed low, slow drops caused torpedo to belly flop. Flat impact crushed internal mechanisms even at slow speeds. Torpedo needed to enter water at specific angle, between 20 and 25 degrees. Too shallow, it skipped. Too steep, dove too deep or broke apart. But achieving that angle from 100 feet at 130 miles per hour was nearly impossible. Pilot had to judge distance, speed, altitude, release point perfectly while being shot at. Lauritsen had an idea. What if torpedo could be stabilized during fall? What if they could control entry angle regardless of drop height or speed? His team experimented with attachments. Tried small parachutes, too complex, unreliable. Tried metal fins, too heavy, affected underwater performance. Then someone suggested looking at how Japanese dropped their torpedoes. December 7, 1941. Japanese Kate bombers devastated Pearl Harbor with Type 91 torpedoes. Those torpedoes had wooden box fins attached to tails. Boxes broke away on water impact, but stabilized torpedo during fall. American intelligence recovered several unexploded Type 91s from Pearl Harbor. Wooden attachments noted but dismissed as primitive, unnecessary for American torpedoes. Japanese spent 3 years developing those wooden box fins. Called them stabilizer plates. Japanese aviators training at Kagoshima Bay, 1939, experienced same problems Americans had with Mark 13. Their Type 91s failed more than half the time. Commander Mitsuo Fukuda, who later led Pearl Harbor attack, personally oversaw tests of dozens of different stabilizer designs. Final wooden box was result of over 2,000 test drops. Americans didn't know this history. Just saw crude wooden boxes, dismissed them. Lauritsen didn't dismiss anything. His team built their own wooden box fins, tested them at Morris Dam. Worked, but not well enough. Boxes created too much drag, slowing torpedo so much it lost forward momentum and tumbled. They needed something better. Dr. L.A. Dubridge, another Caltech physicist on Lauritsen's team, suggested airfoil shape instead of box. Airfoil would create less drag while providing stability. Tried various designs, finally settled on aluminum ring shaped like airplane wing in cross-section. Ring fit around torpedo's tail fins, held with 4 steel bolts. They called it shroud ring. First test, March 15, 1943. Drop dummy torpedo from Morris Dam slide at speed equivalent to 200-knot aircraft release. Torpedo entered water exactly 22 degrees. Optimal angle they'd calculated. Ran straight 800 yards before recovery. Shroud ring still attached, undamaged. Repeated test 50 times. 48 torpedoes ran perfectly. 2 had minor deviations, still within acceptable parameters. Shroud ring did 2 things. First, stabilized torpedo during fall, prevented tumbling or oscillating. Second, reinforced fragile tail fins, prevented collapse on impact. Shroud rings stayed attached underwater, but airfoil shape actually improved torpedoes' underwater stability. Torpedoes with shroud rings ran straight and true. No hooks, no broaches, no circular runs. But shroud ring only solved half the problem. Torpedo still couldn't be dropped from high altitude or high speed. Impact force would still damage internal mechanisms. Lauritsen's team needed something to slow torpedoes' fall, reduce impact velocity. Experimented with drag devices, fabric streamers that tangled, metal plates that affected accuracy. Then tried simple plywood ring around torpedo nose. Looked ridiculous, like barrel wrapped around warhead. Navy pilots who first saw it called it pickle barrel. Pickle barrel worked. Created drag during fall. Slowed torpedoes' descent 40%. Combined with shroud ring, allowed torpedo to be dropped from 800 feet at 260 knots and still enter water at correct angle and speed. Pickle barrel broke away on impact, leaving torpedo to run normally. April 1944, Lauritsen's team demonstrated for Navy officials. 6 torpedoes dropped from Navy bomber at 1,000 feet, traveling 300 knots. All 6 entered water cleanly. All 6 ran hot, straight, normal. Navy officials were skeptical. Laboratory conditions, controlled tests. Combat was different. Squadron mechanics waited for something like this. When word of Caltech modifications spread through unofficial channels, May 1944, mechanics and pilots reached out to Lauritsen directly. Could they get modifications? Lauritsen said yes, but unauthorized. Bureau of Ordnance hadn't approved modifications. They didn't care. Aviation machinists, mate first-class mechanics, from multiple squadrons, flew to California to learn installation process. Meetings took place in nondescript warehouse near Naval Air Station. Lauritsen's team had workshop there away from official Navy facilities. Couldn't risk Bureau of Ordnance inspectors discovering unauthorized torpedo modifications. Warehouse smelled of machine oil and fresh-cut plywood. Workbenches lined walls, covered with torpedo parts, measuring instruments, strange-looking shroud rings, and pickle barrels. Lauritsen personally showed mechanics how to attach modifications. Shroud ring installation was precise work. For holes drilled through torpedo tail cone at exact locations. Too close to edge, aluminum might crack under stress. Too far inward, interfered with control surfaces. Bolts torqued exactly 35 foot-pounds. Too loose, ring might shift during flight. Too tight, could deform tail cone. Pickle barrel simpler, but still required precision. 3/4-inch marine plywood cut into 40-inch diameter ring with 24-inch center hole. Ring split in half, hinged one side, allowing it to open and place around torpedo nose. 4 steel bands held it, tightened with turnbuckles to exactly 50 pounds tension. Mechanics practiced on dummy torpedoes for days. Lauritsen's team watched, corrected, guided. Showed them how to check alignment, test attachment strength, ensure modifications wouldn't interfere with Avenger's bomb bay loading. After training, could install modifications in 20 minutes. Lauritsen gave them detailed drawings, precise measurements, material specifications, step-by-step installation instructions. Everything needed to replicate work. Papers stamped unofficial, not approved by Bureau of Ordnance, in red letters. Lauritsen told them to share information with other squadron mechanics, but quietly. If Bureau found out about widespread unauthorized modifications before combat proof of effectiveness, they'd shut everything down. Aviation machinists mate First Class John Chin from USS Yorktown was among first mechanics trained. Chin returned to Yorktown, quietly modified 12 torpedoes. Did work at night after regular maintenance hours. Told squadron's pilots what he was doing. They kept quiet. Better ask forgiveness than permission. June 19, 1944. Battle of Philippine Sea. Torpedo squadrons from Task Force 58 attacked Japanese carrier Hyo using modified torpedoes for first time in combat. 8 Avengers dropped from 600 feet at 220 knots, higher and faster than any successful torpedo attack to date. 6 of 8 torpedoes ran true. 3 hit Hyo. All 3 exploded. Carrier sank. First time in war American aerial torpedoes performed as designed in combat. Squadron leaders reported success, but didn't mention modifications. Said pilots simply got lucky with drops. But other pilots in strike noticed something different. Torpedoes entered water like arrows, no splash, no tumbling, no deviation. Pilots who'd seen dozens of torpedo drops knew this was different. After landing, mechanics throughout task force cornered by pilots asking what had been done to torpedoes. Mechanics showed the modifications. Within 12 hours, every torpedo in fleet magazines being fitted with shroud rings and pickle barrels. Mechanics worked through night with volunteer teams. By dawn June 20th, when carriers launched strikes against retreating Japanese fleet, every Avenger carried modified torpedo. Results were dramatic. 24 torpedoes dropped that day. 19 ran hot, straight normal. Sank 2 destroyers, damaged cruiser. Not single Avenger lost to anti-aircraft fire. Word spread through Task Force 58 like wildfire. Pilots from Enterprise visited other carriers to see modified torpedoes. Mechanics from Lexington flew over in COD aircraft to learn installation process. Within week, installation drawings copied and distributed to every carrier in Forward Task Force. Bureau of Ordnance found out when staff inspectors visited carriers, found mechanics installing pickle barrels in broad daylight. Inspectors filed immediate reports demanding all modifications be removed. Responsible parties court-martialed. Reports reached Admiral Mark Mitcher, Commander Task Force 58. Mitcher had seen combat results. He ordered modifications continue, told Bureau that combat effectiveness took priority over regulations. Modifications continued. August 1944, every torpedo squadron in Pacific had shroud rings and pickle barrels. Official designation was Mark 13 Mod 2A, but pilots just called them ringtails. Transformation was immediate, dramatic. Battle of Leyte Gulf, October. Avengers sank super battleship Musashi with multiple torpedo hits. April 1945. Sank Musashi's sister ship Yamato. Same torpedoes that failed miserably in 1942 were now most effective ship killers in American arsenal. Japanese noticed change immediately. Commander Masatake Okimiya, air officer aboard carrier Junyo, wrote after action report from Philippine Sea that American torpedoes suddenly became lethal. Where previously Japanese ships could absorb multiple hits, now single torpedoes caused catastrophic damage. Americans dropping from heights and speeds that should have been impossible. Japanese anti-aircraft doctrine based on forcing torpedo bombers down to low altitude was suddenly obsolete. Captain Toshikazu Ami, operations officer for Combined Fleet, conducted analysis of American torpedo effectiveness September 1944. Noted American torpedo hit rates increased from less than 10% in 1942 to over 40% by mid-1944. More disturbing, percentage of hits causing fatal damage increased from 20% to 70%. Torpedoes not only hitting more often, they were exploding reliably. Ami recommended Japanese ships avoid combat with American carrier forces until secret of improved torpedoes could be discovered. Japanese never found that secret. Lieutenant Commander Takashi Hashimoto, assigned to investigate captured American equipment, examined 4 recovered Mark 13's October 1944. Noted strange plywood ring around nose, aluminum shroud around tail, but dismissed them as shipping protections removed before combat use. Couldn't conceive such simple additions could transform torpedoes' performance. His report concluded Americans must have developed new internal mechanism, possibly electronic. that stabilize torpedo during flight. Recommended capturing intact Avengers for further study. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, commanding Japanese center force at Leyte Gulf, reported American torpedo attacks became overwhelmingly effective. His flagship Yamato took 8 torpedo hits. Battleship Musashi took 19. Both ships considered unsinkable. Their torpedo defense systems, designed to handle older, slower, less reliable American torpedoes, were overwhelmed. Japanese never figured out what changed. They examined crashed Avengers, recovered unexploded torpedoes, but shroud rings and pickle barrels looked like original equipment. Without knowing about Morris dam tests, without understanding hydrodynamics involved, couldn't recognize modifications as modifications. Psychological impact on Japanese naval forces was devastating. Commander Yoshima Yoshimura, executive officer of Cruiser Tone, wrote in diary that American torpedo bombers became demons of sea. Where once Japanese sailors watched torpedo attacks with confidence, knowing most torpedoes would miss or fail, now watched in terror. Sight of Avengers approaching at high altitude, previously sign they carried bombs, now meant torpedoes would soon be in water. No safe altitude, no safe distance. Transformation in American torpedo effectiveness changed entire Pacific Naval War. In 1942-43, Japanese surface forces operated with relative impunity. Their ships could absorb torpedo hits that didn't explode, could maneuver to avoid torpedoes that ran erratically. By 1944, Japanese ships were hunted to extinction. Combined fleet that seemed invincible after Pearl Harbor was reduced to scattered remnants hiding in harbors. Numbers told story. 1942, American torpedo bombers achieved hit rate less than 5%. Of those hits, fewer than half exploded. Late 1944, hit rates exceeded 40%, and 95% of hits resulted in explosions. Kill rate per sortie increased by factor of 15. What had been most dangerous, least effective mission in naval aviation became precision ship-killing operation. Leyte Gulf. Destruction was systematic. October 24, 1944. Waves of Avengers from Task Force 38 attacked Japanese battleship Musashi. First wave put 4 torpedoes into portside. Ship listed, but kept moving. Second wave put 3 more into starboard side, correcting list, but flooding more compartments. Third wave put 4 more torpedoes portside. Fourth wave added 6 more hits. Fifth and final wave put 3 more torpedoes into dying ship. Musashi rolled over, sank at 1935 hours, taking over 1,000 men with her. Every one of those torpedoes had shroud rings and pickle barrels. Dropped from altitudes between 400 and 800 feet at speeds between 180 and 260 knots. Under old doctrine, those drop parameters would have guaranteed failure. With Caltech modifications, they guaranteed success. Musashi, which Japanese naval architect designed to survive 20 torpedo hits, succumbed to 19 because every hit caused maximum damage. Following day, October 25th, Avengers found Yamato and escorts off Samar. Lieutenant Commander William Ispel led 12 Avengers from Hancock in attack. Approached at 8,000 feet, well above effective anti-aircraft range, then dove at 45-degree angles, releasing torpedoes at 600 feet while traveling 250 knots. 10 of 12 torpedoes ran true. 8 hit various ships in formation. Yamato took 3. Cruiser Nagato took 2. Destroyers took rest. All exploded. Formation scattered, disrupting Japanese attack on American escort carriers off Samar. Lieutenant Robert Holcomb, flying one of those Avengers, wrote in after-action report. Torpedo entered water with barely splash, ran absolutely straight. No hook, no broach, no circular run. Like watching textbook demonstration. Explosion against Yamato's hull sent water column 200 feet high. First time since I started flying torpedo runs, had complete confidence my weapon would work. Official Navy history credited improved pilot training, better tactics. Bureau of Ordnance in 1946 final report claimed continuous refinement of Mark 13 throughout war resulted in steadily improving performance. They didn't mention refinements came from civilian scientists working outside official channels. Didn't mention hundreds of pilots died carrying defective weapons, while Newport insisted nothing was wrong. Charles Lauritsen received Presidential Medal for Merit in 1948. Citation mentioned contributions to rocket development and underwater ordnance. Didn't specifically mention torpedo modifications. Lauritsen went back to nuclear physics after war, helped develop hydrogen bomb, served on Atomic Energy Commission. Rarely talked about torpedo work. When asked, would say they just applied basic physics to engineering problem. Squadron commanders, who first used unauthorized modifications, survived war. They trained generation of Navy pilots, telling them same story. Sometimes system fails. Sometimes official channels don't work. When that happens, you decide whether following regulations is more important than saving lives. They never regretted decisions to use unauthorized modifications. The pilots who came back because of those modifications were justification enough. Mechanics who installed modifications left Navy after war, returned to civilian life, went back to garages and machine shops across America, had photographs on office walls, standing next to Avengers with ringtail torpedoes loaded in bomb bays. Customers would ask about them. They'd say they worked on airplanes during war. Didn't mention their midnight modifications helped sink Japanese fleet. Aviation radioman First Class Harry Fryer, 17-year-old who survived June 4th Midway attack with Ernest, flew 47 more combat missions. Every time he climbed into Avenger after August 1944, knew his torpedo would work. Knew someone somewhere fixed problem that killed so many of his friends. Didn't know about Caltech or Morris Dam or pickle barrels until years after war. Just knew suddenly, mysteriously, torpedoes worked. Fryer described difference in 1998 interview. Before modifications, every torpedo run was prayer. You'd watch torpedo drop, see it hit water, hold your breath. Would it run? Would it explode? Usually answer was no. After late 44, completely different. Torpedo would drop, enter clean, run true. Could actually see it tracking toward target underwater, steady as train on rails. When it hit, it exploded. Every time. Like we'd been given completely new weapon. Lieutenant George Bush, future president, flew 58 combat missions in Avengers from USS San Jacinto. September 2, 1944, shot down over Chichijima while attacking Japanese radio station. 2 crew members, Lieutenant Junior Grade William White and Radioman Second Class John Delaney, killed. Bush survived, rescued by submarine USS Finback. But before being shot down, Bush successfully delivered 4 modified torpedoes in previous missions, sinking cargo ship and damaging destroyer. In memoir, Bush wrote about difference reliable torpedoes made to pilot morale. Knowing your weapon will work changes everything. Can focus on flying, on evading flak, on getting crew home safe. You're not wondering if you're risking life for nothing. Ensign Jesse Brown, Navy's first African-American aviator, flew Avengers with Torpedo Squadron 32 from USS Leyte, late 1944 and 1945. Brown's squadron exclusively used ringtail torpedoes. First combat mission January 4, 1945. Brown put torpedo into Japanese tanker off Formosa. Ship exploded. Sank in 12 minutes. Brown later said having weapon he could trust gave him confidence to prove himself in Navy skeptical of African-American pilots. Knew his success or failure would depend on skill, not defective equipment. Modifications saved American lives in ways beyond improved hit rates. Because pilots could drop from higher altitudes, faster speeds, they spent less time in anti-aircraft range. Because they could attack from multiple angles simultaneously, Japanese gunners couldn't concentrate fire. Because more torpedoes hit and exploded, fewer missions needed to sink each target. Naval Aviation Safety Center calculated in 1946 that torpedo modifications reduced Avenger combat losses approximately 60% in last year of war. Fryer lived until 2016, aged 90. Spent last decades traveling to veteran reunions, telling story of Torpedo Squadron 8, of men who died at Midway carrying defective weapons. Ended talk same way every time. Brave young men who died in 1942 were not failed by courage or skill. They were failed by system that valued bureaucratic control over combat effectiveness. Their sacrifice forced changes that came later. Every Japanese ship sunk by torpedo after 1944 was vindication for men who died in 1942 trying to deliver torpedoes that wouldn't work. Bureau of Ordnance never officially acknowledged failure of Mark 13 torpedo in original configuration. 1946 report to Congress stated torpedo performance had been satisfactory throughout war period with continuous improvements. Didn't mention those improvements were forced upon them by combat failures and civilian intervention. Report credited Newport with developing shroud ring modification, even though design came entirely from Caltech. Claimed pickle barrel was natural evolution of existing drag reduction research. Ignoring Newport rejected drag devices 3 years while pilots died. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, who commanded amphibious forces throughout Pacific War, wrote private letter to Admiral King, December 1945. Stated torpedo scandal of 1942 to 43 cost Navy more pilots than any tactical error. Estimated proper torpedoes could have shortened war by 6 months. Letter was classified, buried in Navy archives. Turner never spoke publicly about torpedo problem. Families of dead pilots never knew truth. Barbara Fieberling, widow of Lieutenant Langdon Fieberling, who died leading TBF detachment at Midway, spent 40 years believing her husband died in fair fight against superior Japanese forces. Didn't learn about defective torpedoes until 1987 when a historian interviewed her for a book about Midway. Broke down crying, not from grief, but anger. Her husband died carrying weapon Navy knew was defective. Margaret Waldron, widow of Lieutenant Commander John Waldron, who led 15 devastators from Hornet, received letter from President Roosevelt praising her husband's sacrifice. Letter mentioned determined attack against overwhelming odds. Didn't mention his squadron's torpedoes had less than 30% chance of working, even if they reached targets. Margaret kept that letter framed on wall until she died in 1993. Never knew full truth. Newport Naval Torpedo Station continued as Navy's primary torpedo facility until 1951. Finally closed. Production dispersed to multiple contractors. Monopoly that cost so many lives was quietly disbanded. No official investigation ever conducted into why it took civilian scientists to fix problem Navy knew about since 1941. Classified reports documenting Mark 13's failures remained sealed until 1972. Last surviving ringtail torpedo is on display at National Museum of Naval Aviation in Pensacola. Placard mentions modifications developed 1944 improved torpedoes' effectiveness. Doesn't mention pilots who died before those modifications. Doesn't mention modifications came from outside Navy. Doesn't mention they were initially unauthorized. History, as written by institutions, tends to omit institutional failures. But real history, one that matters, is simpler. Physicist who knew nothing about torpedoes looked at problem with fresh eyes. Lieutenant commander risked career to save pilots. Mechanic worked through night to install unauthorized modifications. Together, they turned worst torpedo in American arsenal into ship killer that helped win Pacific War. That's how technical innovation actually happens in war. Not through official channels or bureaucratic approval, but through people who see problems, find solutions, don't wait for permission to save lives. Grumman TBF Avenger became best torpedo bomber of World War II. Not because it was fastest or most maneuverable or best armed, but because someone finally gave a torpedo that worked. Aircraft had always been capable. Pilots had always been brave. They just needed weapon they could trust. Between 1942 and 1945, 9,836 Avengers were built. They sank 29 Japanese aircraft carriers, battleships, and cruisers. Sank over 30 submarines. Dropped torpedo that sent Yamato to bottom. Largest battleship ever built. But greatest victory wasn't measured in tonnage sunk. Was in proving problems everyone knows about can be solved if someone's willing to break rules. wooden pickle barrel, and aluminum shroud ring developed in Mountain Reservoir by physicists who'd never been to sea saved more American pilots than any improvement in aircraft design or pilot training. Turned Battle of Philippine Sea into what pilots call Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Made kamikaze attacks of 1945 act of desperation by Navy that could no longer protect ships with conventional forces. Today, every military acquisition program has multiple contractors, competitive bidding, independent testing. Lessons of Mark 13 torpedo built into system. But those lessons were written in blood, paid for by men who flew into Japanese anti-aircraft fire, carrying weapons they knew probably wouldn't work, hoping this time maybe torpedo would run hot, straight, and normal.